The rain fell diagonally across the valley, transforming the muddy path into a fragmented mirror. John gripped the lantern tightly. His fingers were numb from the cold that pierced his leather gloves. The village of Vereen was a 4-hour walk, but he needed to arrive before nightfall. The bundle strapped to his back weighed more than it should. Its straps cut into his shoulders, even through his thick coat. Inside, wrapped in waterproof tarpaulin, was the stone hammer found in the cave 3 days prior. The piece was just over 30 centimeters long, with symmetrical grooves that defied its apparent age. The villagers whispered about objects choosing their owners, but John, a historian specializing in ancient technology, attributed it to folklore. Until the moment the hammer warmed in his hands during the storm, emitting a hum that only he could hear. The sound began as an underground tremor, then transformed into overlapping voices in dead languages. He tried to drop the object, but his fingers remained glued to the handle, nails breaking against the rough surface. When the rain stopped abruptly, the mud beneath his feet dried in seconds, forming cracks that climbed up the trees. It was then that he saw the markings on the bark, symbols identical to those on the hammer, fresh as if carved that morning. The first house of Vereen emerged among the pines. Its roof collapsed and windows shattered. No light, no movement. John cried out for help until his throat burned, until a figure emerged from behind a dilapidated barn. The woman wore a faded military coat and carried a hoe whose metal gleamed with a greenish tint. "You brought her," she said, not as a question. Her eyes were fixed on the bundle, pupils dilated, even under the weak light of the fading day. "They always return here, even when the bodies can't take it anymore." Her name was Celeste, and she had lived alone since the team of geologists disappeared the previous winter. As she stitched the gash in John's arm with thick, unanesthetized thread, she explained that the tools weren't artifacts, but remnants. Leftovers of something that existed before humans named the world. "That hoe you saw," she said, pointing to a corner of the cabin, "replaced my liver 6 months ago. Grew in place when the cancer returned." Her voice was calm, like describing a planting. On the wall, yellowed photographs showed men holding plows that seemed to move in the shadows. The next morning, the hammer felt lighter. John awoke with his right hand wrapped in a gelatinous substance that dripped from the shelf where he'd left it. The substance contained fragments of human bones and teeth. Celeste was preparing a hallucinogenic mushroom tea when he confronted her about the village's stories. "Do you think we chose to use these things?" She laughed, revealing dark gums. "They use us to replicate. Like intelligent viruses." She pointed to the hoe. Its blade had lengthened overnight, curving at an impossible angle. That afternoon, they walked to the cave where the hammer had been found. The entrance was blocked by a rusty grate, but Celeste opened it with a touch. Inside, hundreds of tools hung from the ceiling like stalactites, vibrating in unison. John felt his blood pounding in his ears. The same hum of the hammer amplified. Celeste sliced the palm of her left hand with an obsidian sickle and let the blood drip onto a rusty hoe. The tool absorbed the liquid, transforming into an identical copy of the sickle. "They learn," she whispered, "and each copy carries a piece of the person who fed it." On the return journey, John noticed that his shadow no longer followed his movements. Instead, it projected ahead, contorting into shapes resembling the tools from the cave. He tried to remove the hammer from his back, but it was now part of his spine, vertebrae fused to the handle. Celeste explained that the only way to survive was to find someone to pass the burden. "Or you become a permanent host," she said, pointing to a cowering figure in the back of the cabin. The man had no face, only a smooth surface where rust flowed like tears. On the third night, John dreamt of an underground city where buildings were made of flesh and screws. Tools moved on their own, stitching veins into newborns and replacing organs with gears. He awoke with a taste of earth in his mouth and a piece of nail growing in place of his left molar. Celeste was sitting at the table, carving a replica of the hammer from a piece of bone. "You understand now," she said without looking. "They are not tools. They are surgeons." Outside the cabin, the entire valley had changed. Trees with metallic veins, animals with extra joints, streams flowing upwards. As the sun rose for the last time, John left the village carrying 2 hoes, 3 sickles, and the hammer fused to his back. He knew he needed to find someone before the tools completed their transformation. Celeste waved until he disappeared from sight, her silhouette slowly merging with the shifting landscape. In his pocket, a piece of paper with scribbled coordinates marked the next village where a man with a titanium shovel was about to die. The road east was covered in snow that wouldn't melt, not even under the melodic sun. John adjusted the straps of the tools on his back, which now weighed 3 times more since they fused with his muscles. Each step left deep marks in the ground, but they weren't footprints. They were geometric patterns that briefly glowed before crumbling. The village of Erasmo, marked in Celeste's coordinates, appeared at irregular intervals on the horizon, sometimes distant, sometimes too close, as if the space between them was made of elastic. Sometimes, John saw silhouettes in the hills, figures holding tools similar to his, but when he approached, only scorched circles of earth remained. On the second night, he found the first body. It lay face down in a ravine, its translucent skin revealing veins of liquid metal. The right hand had fused to a rusty shovel, its blade extending to the elbow. Upon touching the corpse, John felt the hammer on his back pulse, sending a wave of heat that made his joints crack. The dead man's eyes opened, not in sockets, but in horizontal slits that resembled mouths. "They aren't burying the bodies," a voice whispered from within the skull. "They are planting." Before John could retreat, metallic roots sprouted from the man's chest, wrapped around his ankle, and pulled him into the earth. He awoke in a forest of towering cathedral-like trees, their trunks carved with mathematical equations. A woman crouched by a fire turned when she heard him approach. Her name was Celine, and half her face was a porcelain mask fused to her flesh. "You brought the hammer," she said, not surprised, but with weary resignation. In her hands, a gardening shears opened and closed on their own, slicing the air in precise patterns. "They test us," she continued, pointing to the trees. "Each tool is a puzzle. If you fail, the piece becomes fertilizer." Celine spoke of engineers, figures who appeared during sandstorms, adjusting the tools as if they were organic clocks. Once, she tried to destroy her shears, throwing them into a river of acid. The tool returned 3 days later, bringing a piece of her own little finger transformed into a blade. "There's no way to win," she said, emptying a leather bag filled with human teeth. "But you can bargain." She showed a gear-shaped scar on her neck. "Give them something they can't replicate. A memory. A regret." The next morning, Erasmo was a kilometer away, but the path was blocked by a living stone wall. The bricks pulsed like hearts, and fluorescent lichen spelled words in archaic Latin. John used the hammer to strike the barrier, but the tool didn't obey. Instead, his fingernails grew until they pierced his gloves, burying themselves in the stone. The wall absorbed the blood and opened, revealing a square where houses folded into origami of wood and roofs. In the center, a man knelt, a titanium shovel embedded in his back. It was the man from Celeste's coordinates. "Don't let him take me," the man gasped, but his words came out backward, like a cassette tape. The shovel in his back had roots that burrowed into the ground, sprouting miniature replicas of itself. John tried to pull the tool, but his fingers stuck to the metal that began to melt towards him. It was then that he noticed the children, or what remained of them. They ran in circles, limbs replaced by hoes and hammers, mouths stitched with barbed wire. One stopped before him, its eyes empty where pupils should have been. "He will use you as a bridge," the voice said, coming from a hole in the neck. "The tools need new paths." Celine appeared beside him, her shears slicing the air in spirals. "Give them what they want," she commanded, and John realized he was holding a fragment of bone ripped from his own hand during the struggle with the wall. Celine's shears cut the fragment into perfect cubes that she threw towards the children. They crumbled into metallic dust, revealing a narrow passage between the houses. The man with the shovel was gone, only a pile of rust and gray hair. As they continued north, Celine explained that the tools were part of a larger nervous system, something that existed in layers beneath the visible reality. "They don't want to destroy you," she said, stitching a tear in his arm with steel thread. "They want to evolve through you." John felt something move within him. The hammer was no longer on his back, but inside his body, its grooves spreading like blood vessels. That night, he dreamt of an operating room where faceless surgeons transplanted tools into sleeping patients. All the instruments had faces. John followed Celine through the narrow passage, feeling the weight of the tools within him, as if they had become part of his own flesh. Each step was a struggle against the feeling that he was being molded, transformed into something beyond human. The sky above them seemed darker, almost alive, with stars that shone like eyes watching. Celine spoke in whispers about a place called The Root, where the tools gathered to exchange memories and experiences, but John knew he couldn't move forward without understanding what they truly were, and what he could become. When they reached the edge of the forest, a shimmering light appeared on the horizon, as if the earth itself were breathing. Celine stopped, her eyes fixed on the light. "It's the last chance," she said, handing him a small object, a key made of bone and metal. "Use it when you need to. But remember, you are no longer just a man. You are a path." John held the key, feeling it vibrate in his hands, and continued onward, leaving behind what remained of himself, towards the unknown.